Fire rituals of sub-Saharan Africa.
Fire rituals of Europe.
Fire rituals of Southern Africa, or actually fire mythology of South Africa.
Fire ritual and mythology of Italics in Roman time.
I've kind of been looking at the sort of link between colonialism, traditional religion, Christianity, modernism, and fire, and kind of how that fits in with my research, and such that it sort of situates fire within it, like within social ecological relations, and how like colonial context, and by situating it within its colonial context, you can sort of try and decolonize the dominant narrative. So basically, I've been looking at I've been reading this paper. It's called Things Fall Apart, Missions, Institutions and Interpersonal Trust. And it's basically talking about how early missionaries believed that their success rested on changes to pre-colonial, also referred to as traditional, institutions, beliefs, cultures and norms. So normally in trying to decolonize the narrative, I wouldn't use the term traditional, but because I'm translating some of the papers I've read here, I'll be using this term for like sort of clarity. But basically, during the 19th and 20th century, during European colonization, missionaries introduced new religion, so Christianity, aspirations and ways of life, and across Africa. So this fundamentally changed the rules, organizing these pre-colonial societies, separating individuals from their communities, and this ultimately sort of disintegrated society. So sort of what was the role of these Christian missionaries? So British colonial administrations largely ruled indirectly, leaving control to local administrations, leaving the control of local administrations to traditional local chiefs and authorities. But like despite this sort of like keeping it in traditional like realms, the proliferation of Western Christian norms and beliefs throughout communities across Africa as a result of these missionary activities resulted in individuals challenging traditional norms and authorities. So that actually created great dissidence within and between these communities. So this study was published this year, and it showed that where communities were exposed to missionary activities, there is higher distrust between members of the same ethnic group and a decline in attachment to traditional society. And the later being evident through a detachment from traditional leaders and a decline in the faith of and belief in traditional gods and participation in the practice and belief in juju and related rituals and ceremonies. So the arrival of Christianity basically altered these existing societal dimensions, and also completely changed behavior. So there was no longer the benefits of cooperating with for pre-colonial norms. And an example of this is the belief in the power of juju to punish was repudiated by missionaries and their new converts. And this led to the spread of juju being regarded as a primitive superstition, which weakened juju spells and the belief in the power of juju and traditional gods, including their ability to sanction behavior. So here is a quote I found. But basically, juju is a French term that means toy or plaything. And it's a European term that was adopted to describe the traditional ancestral religious beliefs of the Yoruba people. And it generally sort of refers to like small objects that Yoruba individuals wear or keep in their possession, as they're believed to like kind of contain energies that bring them luck and protection. Yet colonizers believed that these objects were like central to worship. And of course, in Christian belief, God forbade the use of images, icons, and items in worship. So a quote from Exodus is, "You shall not make yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." So earlier in Europe, the spread of Christianity actually resulted in attacks on images and icons of pagan deities, pagan referring to diverse communities, groups, and the traditional religions, concentrated on specific traditions, practices, and or like reverence of elements. So that could be like whether it's like an ecological element, certain gods, witchcraft. So then when later Europe colonized Africa, paganism was used as a broader term, in the West to describe the practices and beliefs drawn from the traditional religions of indigenous people around the world. So kind of as you can see from this picture, this was actually drawn for the Illustrated London News in 1873, and that's a conservative-leaning paper, which kind of exhibits how kind of Juju was viewed in the Western world. So here's just a quote I found in a research paper that I was reading recently that sort of draws upon this idea of the role of like Christianity in changing the perception and narrative on traditional African religions. And yes, so I'm just going to talk about how the difference sort of between Juju and Voodoo and how they're linked and the link to fire. So sort of like the difference is that Voodoo is actually a religion and is primarily practiced in Haiti, but it has its roots in Western Africa. So it is a derivative of the Yoruba religion, of which it shares many similarities, such as having many gods that each control something different and originate from different regions. So Voodoo actually spread to Haiti and New Orleans during the 15th, 16th century European colonization of the New World through the early transatlantic slave trade. And this forced kind of immigration of African slaves actually provided the circumstances for the development of Voodoo as a derivative of Yoruba, because it's essentially like the kind of mingled and modified practices of many different sort of like cultural groups across Africa and their traditional religious practices. But Voodoo has strong roots in ancestry, and the ancestors must be honored. So Voodoo ceremonies are used to express spirituality and the connection with divinity in the world of spirits. So since one's ancestors are part of this world, this is how like Voodoo practitioners connect to their history and heritage. And this is also where I believe that kind of ecology and religion overlap. So for instance, like Voodoo is one of the oldest religions in the world. And in some areas it's punishable by death and viewed as barbaric and primitive. Yet in pre-colonial societies, ecological knowledge was generational, and it was already transmitted through space and time. And the use of fire as a traditional ecological tool has strong roots in ancestral knowledge and heritage. So sort of like the persecution of these traditional African religions and their ancestral ceremonies and the use of like items to connect spirits likely contributed to like this like idea of the extinction of experience, which has had like adverse fire outcomes across the landscape. So this sort of like just wanted to briefly introduce Oya, the goddess of fire. So she's the fire goddess whose passions are mighty elements that bring forth the storms of change. So Oya may call forth tornadoes and lightning, and she is also the goddess of fertility, capable of stripping away what must die in order to be abundant. So my ideas here were the sort of ideas that for African savannas are the most fire-prone biome in the world, and fire is so important for their kind of composition and functioning. So a question I asked to myself at this stage is, has this weakened belief in Oya, or is this a result of a weakened belief in Oya in some communities? So I'm going to revisit this question. And then last, I was also reading a paper that was also looking at burned area across the world, and how there's been a pyrrhic transition where Africa's experienced a reduction in the number of fires and total area burned. And sort of like this is linked directly to European colonization, since the evolution of kind of like wildfire policies in the West, like quashed diverse fire dialectics across Africa in favor of like a standardized suppression approach. And this is also linked to broader conservation narratives that sort of reflect 19th, 20th century Western and modernist ideals of like the wilderness. And like sort of like the social ecological interactions. So I was also reading a paper that I thought was really interesting. Oh, sorry, this graph just quickly shows the top one is 1998 and the bottom one is 2015. So you can see quite a big gap in fire. I was also reading a paper from Nelson, who refers to this narrative as environmental colonialism, which I thought was really interesting because he sort of links religious ideals, that like religious ideals have been like a center of sort of like Western African relations for a long time. And he argues that scientific knowledge has undermined traditional Christian beliefs and how this has shifted sort of beliefs in the 19th, 20th century towards a modern secular faith in economic progress. However, economic progress has disorientated the world rather than having provided a bountiful human nature. So he therefore states, and this is a quote, As the end of the 20th century approached, a religious vacuum in Western society existed. Neither traditional Christianity nor the secular 20th century religions of progress could fulfill the spiritual aspirations of large numbers of people. In this circumstance, the contemporary environmental movement emerged as one way to fill the vacuum. So I feel like this is also kind of an example of how the environmental movement in Africa is primarily still based on international agenda and imaginings, and how this has caused the extinction of experience among local groups because their knowledge and experiences have been deemed irrelevant and redundant. So lastly, my thoughts going forward are sort of like just looking at the links between colonization, traditional religion, and Christianity, and how these narratives merge across sub-Saharan Africa, and how fire is almost a symptom of the complex interplay between these components. So sort of based on the research, the further questions I hope to explore are how have types of colonial rule impacted pre-colonial cultural practices, beliefs, and norms across sub-Saharan Africa? How is religion constructed and altered fire over millennia? And how is environmentalism associated with spirituality, and how is this evident through fire? So kind of the overarching question I'd like to continue with is how has fire suppression under colonial administrations and a decline in traditional African religions and belief in their gods altered the experience, realities of, and perceptions towards fire in the landscape? I think that's what I'd...
European fire rituals. End of winter fire. Day grows longer to meet the new sun. Earth and body want to be purified. A cleansing to prepare for life again. Old thatch, straw, and brushwood piled up high on eminences. Torches hurried to light the fields, the orchards, vineyards, pastures, and cattle stalls. Ashen strewn on fields so that the flax may grow. In the nests of fowl to ensure plenty. Fire purifies. It frees the population from evils, negativity, suffering, and pain. Fire removes unwanted vegetation, smut and mice. Plagues will be averted. Some say 7 fires must burn to avoid conflagrations. The young leap over the fire for fertility of fields and bodies. Onions will now grow. The tree will bear more fruit. The livelier the dancing, the better will the crops be. Burning and sometimes drowning of the deity of vegetation entreats abundance of sun and rain for sprouting seeds. Spring solstice fire. All fires are extinguished, a new fire is made. Villages burn it simultaneously, always on the same hill. Their entire community comes and dances. The young leap over the flames and cattle pass through. Each brings a wooden stick to char and returns home to light the new hearth fire. Seeds of flax sown in the direction that the wind blows the flames. 3 circles drawn around the ashes, then taken to the fields and mixed with the earth for sowing seeds. This is the fire to make hail not come. In some places it is known as the lucky fire. This is the fire to make hail not come. Mayfire. In some places it is known as the lucky fire. 9 men collect wood from 9 different types of trees, and a fire is made on the hill. Dancing 3 times around the fire southways, or leaping 3 times over the flames ensures a bountiful harvest. If the flame goes north, spring comes cold. If south, it will be mild and gentle. Offerings made to beings who protect, but also to fox, crow, and eagle, to spare lambs. Maypoles bring us world trees. Ribbons turn, world turns, seasons turn, the universe turns. Midsummer, summer solstice fire. Days diminish. Fires made from 9 different kinds of wood, perhaps to represent 9 worlds. A communal public celebration with dancing and sharing of food. With flowers on their heads in the quietness of the forest, couples walk and celebrate each other in this much beloved festival. There is joyful leaping over fires to bring fertility to young couples. Flower crowns holding lit candles are left to float on water. It is the fire to encourage flax to grow. It is the fire against thunder, against hail, against disease amongst the cattle, against all that is noxious to plant, to animals, and to people, and also to keep the rains moderate. It is the time of the burning of the deity of vegetation. Ashes on the body can heal. All Hallow Eve fire. Summer leaves and winter comes. Among the Celts, the year begins at this moment. Family fires, outdoors and indoors. It is not a time of dancing, but of meeting with one's dead ones. The youth welcome the smoke onto their bodies. Later, ashes are gathered and scattered. Cattle return to shelter. The midwinter, the winter solstice fire. A fire burnt indoors to keep inclement weather out. A fire to keep lightning and hail and fire away from the home. Remains kept under the bed, protecting the household all year. The log burnt and ashes ground and strewn in fields to fertilize and save the wheat from mildew. The need fire. At any time of distress, calamity, disease, a living fire is made. But first, all neighboring fires are extinguished. Only wood touching wood is allowed to make this wildfire. Then comes the animals over the fire. Then the youth, ashing themselves black, ashing the fields to rid it of mice. At times, a need fire is made only to dispel the mist. On May 4th, a fire was lit with sweetgrass, cedar, and fat pine. We gathered smoke to our bodies for remembering Lydia Curti, who died on April 21st. These notes are compiled from The Golden Bough by James Frazier, several sporadic sources in the internet, and an interview with Marcello Di Giudici, May 2021. And the next step I want to do is to look at specifically more on Naples. I was looking at Europe and fire rituals. And like Abby, the Catholic Church has been involved in suppressing many of these rituals. And it has been such a very long history that it has become folkloric for Europeans. And they don't have sometimes the possibility of remembering their own ancestral knowledge, scientific knowledge of how to deal with fires. I keep reading in the commentary that people like take torches and go through the fields. And I believe there must have been something more systematic or more care taken, because I don't see the whole thing coming up in fire. But that's what is available now to us about the European methods of fire. And I'm hoping to meet with farmers in Naples in the coming 2 weeks and to see what it is that is remembered and how is the fire controlled on properties today. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is a story coming from the San people in Africa, at how they got fire. And the story goes that in past there was no source for light and warmth in the night, so families used to go out and hunt during the day, but when the sun used to go down, they used to just come together, and it was a difficult time. And the god of San people, one of the god was a mantis. And mantis, when he saw that the San people struggled at night, he thought maybe if he could do something about providing light and warmth to people. And he saw that the ostrich used to behave a bit awkwardly at times. And so he thought there was something suspicious about the ostrich. And so he followed ostrich for some time. And in those days, it said that the ostrich was a very beautiful bird. It had white feathers, like silvery feathers, and it could also fly using those feathers. So the mantis saw one day that after the ostrich used to take something out by opening its feathers and would dip its food in that thing, and then the food used to taste delicious and smell differently. So the mantis thought that the ostrich is an animal which would not be willing to share the secret with humans. So the mantis thought of doing something to get those fire embers from ostrich. So the favorite food of ostrich was plum. So the mantis told the ostrich one day that there's a tree with very nice plums, and the ostrich should go there and eat those plums. So the ostrich went there, and the ostrich was quite like the plums, and he even liked them so much that he forgot about his wife and just kept on eating the plums. The mantis told the ostrich that the best plums are actually on top, and he should go higher and higher on the tree. So the ostrich climbed further higher up, and it was a bit difficult for the ostrich to balance himself on the tree. And then, by taking an opportunity, the mantis quickly grabbed some embers from the wings of ostrich, and the mantis started running. Now, mantis wasn't as fast as the ostrich, but the ostrich, when the ostrich realized that mantis has taken away something, the ostrich ran after the mantis. And so this is the mantis, and this is the ostrich, right? These days. Uh, so when the ostrich soon caught up with the mantis, and then the mantis threw some sand into ostrich's uh, eyes, and then ostrich couldn't see anything, and then he started flapping its wings, and then its wings got fire from the embers, and it became that's how the ostrich lost all of its beautiful white feathers, and it could not fly anymore, and all its feathers became black. And what we see, some of the feathers today, are just remnants of what feathers the ostrich used to have at one time. And then the mantis got the fire embers to humans, and that's how. And the mantis told us that we should cook food like how ostriches used to do it, and that's how we have fire today, and we can eat delicious food. So I was also visited by the mantis god at one day, which you see in the picture, and I also saw the ostrich, on an ostrich farm in South Africa, with the black feathers. I think going forward, I'm still thinking about, because this was an interesting story which I read about from the landscape about fire. Unfortunately, in Western Cape, there isn't a lot of the traditional indigenous way of living, but I will try to go through some of the old policy acts, and through them look at how fire was framed and how local fire use was blamed. So there's a lot of still groundwork, a homework to be done to understand how fire has changed, especially in Cape Town. And I will try to see that there was a recent fire in Cape Town. So I'll try to see how some of the perceptions that came out in media and on Twitter recently, how they are very similar to how fire incidents were seen in 1800, 1850 or something, to see that what's the difference and what's the novelty in how we approach fire these days, and whether it has changed or not, and where is that knowledge coming from.
Okay. So, as you can see, this is the temple of Vesta. And what I will talk about is the Roman veneration of fire and the tradition of the ritual of the three fires. And so in Rome, the perpetual fire of the house of Vesta was one of the most important symbols of Rome. The fire of the house of Vesta was considered the sacred heart of the city. So Georges Dumézil finds the origin of this ritual in the practice of the tree fire of the master of the house in Vedic religion. The Indians of Vedic times offered a sacrifice, preparing a piece of ground, following strict and constant rules. This essential arrangement was made of 3 fires. 2 were principal and 1 accessory. The 2 axial fires are light on the east-west line, following the sun, and have different purposes. One is called the fire of the master of the house and represents the sacrificer himself with his family and his economic ties. This area is the basis of the entire ceremony. The other fires are lighted from it, and if this fire is extinguished, the sacrifice may not continue. This fire must be lighted by friction. It expresses the earth roots of the man addressing the gods. It is the fire of this world. The other axial fire at the east of the first one is called the fire of offerings, and its smoke carries the gift of man from this world to the gods. The third fire is called the fire at the right, or the south fire. It is located at the boundaries of the sacrificial area. Its function is to stand guard over the scary sides from which the attacks of the evil spirits are feared. The Brahman science further divides the 2 fires: earthly fire, the lightning, and the sun. As you were saying before, Maria Teresa, there is a connection. Then continuing, the Roman tradition shows remarkable correspondences with the Indian tradition. First of all, we find the duality of the fire of the master of the house and the fire of the offering. So, continuing with the slides, sorry, I forgot. So here we see Agni, who is the god of fire for Hinduism. And then here is Rome and the Foro Romano, and very small there we can see the temple of Vesta, where was the perpetual fire. And that find correspondences with the fire of the master of the house, and where the offering was burnt and transmitted to the gods. Close to this fire, to the perpetual fire, there was a symbolic portable fire or portable heart. Close to the Ara. The Ara is the altar of Vesta. And this fire was used only before the sacrifice to receive incense and wine, so symbol of the house, of the daily life. So in Rome, there was the fire of Vesta, which was located in the heart of the city and was perpetual. And then there were other fires like that were portable and were located usually in front of the other temples, so the other goddess, and they were temporary and used for specific celebration. And somehow the perpetual fire of Vesta was considered the symbol of the heart of Rome, and it sort of guaranteed to the city to be rooted on earth, and somehow its role on history, its sort of permanence. And the fire of Vesta was guarded by 6 virgin women, the Vestals, and they were guarding the fire for 30 years. They had to be virgin, otherwise they were banned. As for the Vedic tradition, if the fire was going off, it must be lighted by friction with a piece of wood taken from the arbor felix. And this was also underlying the fact that it had to be lighted by friction, the somehow a part, like belonging of this fire from the earth, the world. And the temporary fires instead that were going along with it and to the light it up in the different temples were somehow sacrificing fire that were instead used to communicate to the gods, so to the other world. And so the fire of Vesta was somehow the fire directed to earth, and it was swept out every 15th of June, and the vestals were dumped into the Tiber River together with the ashes that were collected or gathered during the year. And for the Vedic fires as well, somehow together with this Vedic fire and this offering fire, there was a third fire, which somehow was as well as in the Vedic tradition, a fire that was used to keep the evil spirit away, and was somehow symbolized by the god Vulcanus. This was a god that was both good and evil. It was devouring and destroying, but also a source of power. And later, Vulcano was compared with the Greek god of Hephaestus, which was the god of fire also, but also of crafting, of carpenters, metal worker, artisans, sculpture, and metallurgy. Vulcanus was a useful and dangerous god at the same time, and therefore his temple was outside the walls of the city. And this was also regulation that can be traced back to Vitruvius and the Etruscan wisdom, because it was out of the city, because it was considered important that this god, which was somehow dangerous, were not inside the city. And the one in Rome was close to the side of the Capitol, and there was this small space called the Volcanal that we can see here. I forgot to go. This is a Vestal, and this is Volcano, and this is the Volcanale. And the Volcanale is the place, the shrine of Vulcano, and where there was the fire of celebrating Vulcano. But every 23rd of August, there was this big party called the Vulcanalia, which somehow it was happening according to some celebration in relation to possible threat to the crops or the granaries that during the summer for wildfires or like scarcity of water. And during this time, small live fishes were sacrificed to the fire, to Vulcanus, at the place of human souls. And so somehow Vesta, in the Roman tradition, was the core of somehow the sacred tradition, and her power was extended to all the divinities. And Vesta was not represented through an image, but she was represented directly with fire. And all the prayers and the sacrifices ended with this goddess, with offer to this goddess, because somehow she was the guardian of the innermost thing, which was fire. And I found quite interesting the fact that beside this doctrine can be associated to the credo that fires is one of the fundamental elements for the universe and man. It was considered as an essential and important force, like the sort of source of life, and which is at the opposite of contemporary Western tradition, where fire has acquired a more negative connotation. mainly symbolizing a threat of catastrophe, and is banned from social and ecological life. And instead, in the Roman tradition, was somehow the art of the society, the core of healthy society. And my interest for the future is like to keep researching how this perception of fire has changed, in particular. Yeah. So that's